Hello, everyone, and welcome to another SDGC review discussion. I'm Derek. I'm joined by my good buddy, Jeff. Jeff, what's going on, man?
I'm excited. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to talk about this fucking game that we've been playing.
Yeah, I think
That
this is just me and you who've been playing this out of the crew.
and
Um,
Reb.
oh, that's
Shout out
right,
to
and Reb,
Reb. Like
Reb, when
I did
Reb was
not
on.
expect this to be a Reb game, but I'm very happy that it
I
was.
could not be happier that this is a Reb Core game.
Yeah.
We are here today to talk about Dragon's Dogma 2, developed and published by Capcom. We got a PC review copy of the game from Capcom, which is how I played. Jeff, I believe you purchased it on your own, also on PC?
Yeah, on PC.
Yes. So thank you to Capcom for providing us a review copy of the game and allowing us to do coverage for it. That out of the way, before we get into it, let's talk a little bit about how our review for this is going to work. First, we're going to talk in more broad terms about our opinions of the game, right? We'll talk about gameplay. We'll talk about, visuals and performance. We'll talk about our feelings, everything that somebody who wants to go in mostly blind would want to hear without being spoiled. Then we'll make a pretty clear point where we say, past this point is spoilers, you've been warned. And we're not going to spoil the story. We're not going to discuss the ending or anything. But I think a lot of the magic of this game, this is something you pointed out too, is the feeling of the unknown and the exploration.
Mhm.
And I can understand a lot of people wanting to not even hear about the outcomes of side quests, or a couple of the various possibilities or things they might stumble onto. So we'll talk about some of that stuff, but try still not to get too deep into spoilers in the second half of the review. Jeff, I think it's pretty well known that I am a Dragon's Dogma 1 sicko, but I'm not actually familiar with your level of familiarity with the original game.
I mean, the pandemic just destroyed my brain and sense of time, but I don't have a great memory anyway. The great thing is I can play a game and a year later it's basically I never played it. So replayability for me is fantastic. So I did play Dragon's Dogma 1. I want to say near the time of release, before Dark Arisen.
Oh, you were there for the vanilla days.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I played it on PS3. It was rough. I was less of a snob back then, so I don't think I was too bothered by it. But no, I put in, it's I'll do with a lot of games. I put in, I want to say a good 20 hours. I saw some good chunk of the game, and then I think I either got distracted by something else, as happens, or I might have just said, a lot of times I do, I'm good. I'm full. I don't feel the need to finish it. I saw what it was about. I had a really good time. And moved on. I think it was probably that one. And definitely thinking back on it, I think I wasn't playing it right. I think I was insistent on playing it without pawns, which now having played Dragon's Dogma 2, I understand that's kind of beside the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked my time with it enough that it made a very strong impression, not in the same deep strokes that it did for you, but the basics, the stuff everyone talks about. I remember nighttime in that game that has stuck with me, and I think about that often, even in the years before Dragon's Dogma 2 was announced. I often, playing games at night, think man, you know what was cool was Dragon's Dogma.
Yeah. Walking through the forest at
Yeah.
night, only seeing...
And that's and
Oh.
that's how I know it's a special game, is I didn't really finish it. I didn't spend hundreds of hours with it, but in that short time, it made more of an impression with me than a lot of other games that I played for 50 hours did.
I feel
that's why I was on board for this sequel.
Yeah, I feel like the original Dragon's Dogma is one of those wonderful messy sevens that
Mm-hmm.
it's a perfect example of how a lot of times it is better to be extremely striking and memorable in certain aspects and messy in others than it is to be a bland, boring, safe 7 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can have 2 7 out of 10 games, but the one that hits you with the biggest swings, even if a lot of those swings miss,
Yeah.
is gonna leave an impact. I mean, just to put up front, I feel like Dragon's Dogma 2 is very much like Dragon's Dogma 1, but more. We knew from early on that this game was attempting to bring in, while being basically a fresh start for people who didn't play the first game, it was attempting to pick up on a lot of the content and ideas that had to be cut from the original. Um, and in a lot of ways, this just feels like a more complete
Mhm.
version of the original game, despite
Um,
being totally new.
I'm curious if you can elaborate on that because, like I said, it's been so long since I played it. Like, I feel like Dragon's Dogma 2 is how my brain remembers Dragon's Dogma 1,
Yeah,
but I'm
yeah.
sure there's some changes. But I also think like I really appreciate how the lore kind of supports this being its own thing again without like really feeling like I missed anything.
Yeah.
Because that was also something that holds me back from certain games, like that kind of like my brain doesn't let me skip one in a game and go right into the sequel. So I have to play it, but I don't really want to go back and play that, and I just end up putting it off. So I really, really love like how accessible this game felt from that perspective. Yeah, I'm curious like what kind of glow ups did it get from the first one?
So, one of the things that is definitely, probably the most obvious thing is the Beast Ren, the like feline people that make up the nation of Batal. Although to be fair, you've got like, you know, humans and Beast Ren through both societies, but the whole like two nation system and the Beast Ren people, was something that was originally like clearly intend to be part of the original Dragon's Dogma. There's tons of like concept art and developer interviews where they talk about ideas and mechanics and story beats and things that they wanted to do. I think the elves were another thing that they wanted to do in the original Dragon's Dogma 1, if I remember correctly. So like I don't have like a list on me right now, but
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of the ideas for Dragon's Dogma 2 or Dragon's Dogma 1. Like Dragon's Dogma 1 is ultimately a shadow of what Itsuno's original plan was, and 2 comes a lot closer to that. Um
and I love that because like we've talked to enough developers and stuff like that, right? We know that's how games work. It's like here's what we want to do with this game. Oh fuck, we need to ship this in a year, and stuff gets cut. Like the vision is always compromised to some degree, so it's really really cool to see a team get like a second chance, basically.
yeah. Well, and especially I think it's it's really easy for people to look at this game and say, "Oh, this is like a big, huge budget open world RPG that Capcom put a ton of money and time into." And I actually don't think like this game did spend a good chunk of time in development because this has been in the works since sometime shortly after Devil May Cry 5 launched. So it's been a while.
It was
But
on that Capcom leak, right? And it was originally for like 2022 on that thing.
that's entirely possible. I don't remember the dates or anything on that.
Mhm.
But like you look through the credits of this game, the team is not actually that big. Which kind of lends me to think that this is really more of a very scrappy team at Capcom who were given a lot of time and as a result were able to punch well above their weight in terms of making something that had this humongous detailed handcrafted map that just the process of walking from one town to the other feels like a journey. Obviously that's a thing that people on the internet have been very upset about, like there's not infinite fast travel. But I think
Mhm.
that's like there's not fast travel in Death Stranding either. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Sometimes the game is
because
built.
like in both senses, especially after playing 50 hours of the game, like that's kind of the point to
Yeah,
me.
it
Yeah.
is the journey. It is making it campsite to
Mhm.
campsite to town. It
Yeah.
is, the endurance run of keeping your supplies up and keeping healed. I love the way that your max health lowers over time and you've got to camp at a campsite to get your max health back. It really gives the
Mhm.
feeling of no matter how powerful you are, trekking out into the world is a journey. Um,
Yeah. And I think I talked about it. I might have talked about it on the podcast when Rev was on, but like I was saying that in our Discord, it really reminds me of what I didn't get from Starfield at all. I won't go into that game, but like what I loved about some of Bethesda's games, like making journeys memorable, right? Which is
yes.
again like fast travel kind of eliminates that because there's one point in the game where you go from like one big city to the next and I like the map isn't really filled out. I didn't really know where to go, and I ended up going through a back way. But I like basically it was this like 2 hour long journey through an entire day night cycle. I was on a cliff ledge because it was like really difficult because you really aren't supposed the main quest funnels you a different way. Attacked by birds, I got down. My pawn saved me. And then I tried to make camp. There was a broken bridge. The camp got raided in the middle of the night. I was out of camp light supplies. I was almost dead. I was running low on everything. And I just started booking it where I could see the town in the distance and arrived just as the sun rose, like after all the spirits and shit were attacking me. Like that, and that was just like unscripted, but it
Yeah.
was like as memorable to me as like that ride into Mexico in Red Dead Redemption. Yeah, and that's just like one example from my 50 hours of like shit that happened to me on the way.
Yeah. Like Dragon's Dogma 2, I would say does have a fun, although not necessarily like crazy deep combat system.
Mhm.
Like no single system in Dragon's Dogma 2 is necessarily that crazy deep or hard to explain or hard to grasp. It's the ways in which all of these mechanics, all of these systems combine together, the day
Mhm.
night cycles, the lack of fast travel, the limited stamina, the way that your max health goes down, the ways you have to approach combat, the way that you can't like level up unless you're at a vocation guild, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, you level up, but you can't like put your points into new skills unless you're at a town. Um,
And I hope I'm not talking too much, but
no,
like I've
no,
got
by
I've
all
got a lot of
means.
notes here, and like you're hitting a lot of my points. Like one of the things I love about it is like it's kind of old fashioned. Like I don't know if it's PS2 era, but like I love how basic. Because when you say basic to me, that's like accessible. Because I get really
Yes.
overwhelmed in a Bayonetta game where I go into, or like a fighting game when I go into a combo menu and there's fucking 55 different combos with like 10 button sequences. And I love that Dragon's Dogma. It's like, hey, you can map like 4 of these to like your left bumper plus your face buttons. Here's your stabby button. Here's your slashy button. But like what it maybe lacks in depth per class, there's like a ton of different vocations, which are basically like classes or
Yes,
jobs
10
to play
different
with.
vocations.
And I've only done 3 so far, but all of them, I think Thieves may be a little bit OP from what I'm reading, but all of them feel viable. Like none of them feel underpowered, but they also play dramatically differently and change how I engage in the combat and how I approach the enemies. And same thing, like crafting is there, but it's not crazy. It's not out of hand. Like you can combine a few things to make some stuff, but like I don't feel like I'm buried in the menus half the time, like scrapping together stuff.
Yeah, when
Like
80% of your crafting is can I mix this herb with a food,
yeah,
like it's
yeah.
so that I can make a potion. It's pretty straightforward.
hmm
Well, and I
So that to me, that's like the beauty of the game is its simplicity is really appealing. Because like I can just get to playing the game and feeling like a badass.
and the way like that you brought up, right? Like that your whole the fact that there's multiple there's a so like there's multiple ways to actually traverse because it is an open map and it doesn't funnel you down like here's the main
Mhm.
road and there's no way off of it. You can absolutely just strike out and go places you're not meant to go and come the back way
Mhm.
into the capital of Batal, right?
Yeah.
The fact that enemy placement is not static, enemy
Mhm.
groups and giant enemies like Cyclopses and Cyclopses, I don't know. And griffins and drakes and things like that will be in, you know, not always in the same location, not always spawning. Um, the fact that like
Mhm.
the griffins especially, the range that those things have, it's so interesting to like get in a fight with one and it flies off, and then you feel like a day later and you're running into the same griffin because you're
Yeah.
still in its territory. But
Or it flies off with you on it,
no, that
which
can yeah, that
is
too.
which can be a problem if you're out of stamina.
Making camp like you said and getting attacked because you were just unlucky or you didn't clear the area well enough. Um, it means that Dragon's Dogma is ripe for emergent experiences, right? Things that the developers obviously intended to happen but did not script. Um, and it kind of gives everybody their own adventure. It's really the closest a video game has come in a long time to feeling like a very old school PC RPG, right? In
Mhm.
that sense of like I have no idea how many outcomes there are.
Yeah.
Side quests are a
And
great example of that because like a lot of these side quests can have multiple ways to complete them and multiple endings,
yeah.
instead of just the generic like you got to go here, you got to fight this thing, you turn in
A-
7 bear asses.
And like some of them have markers, but some of them don't, where it's just like you kind of have to figure out what to do. But then even beyond that, some of them will be like initiated by someone running up to you like you're used to in a game, like, oh, oi, arisen. Uh but other ones, like you actually have to go around the town and talk, like make the effort to talk to people to discover them, which is to be honest, not something I typically do in RPGs. I look for the ones with the exclamation mark above their
Yeah.
head. But it like really got me more invested in the world, like just going around and even though they don't have like a ton to say, when you kind of go into someone's house and talk to them and like, oh, this is like a whole thing now. It's really cool.
Yeah. I also like, this is a thing I think like basically all of us who played Elden Ring pointed out when Elden Ring dropped, right? And I would be remiss not to bring it up here, but Dragon's Dogma's approach to the open world is so good because there aren't towers you climb that unveil part of the map, and there aren't like checklists of things to do in each
Hmm.
geographically carved out region of the map where it's like broken up into the United States of Grand Soren, right?
Yep.
Um Grand Soren's the first
You're
game.
hitting like everything on my list. This is like
Yeah.
when you said about the map, like again, it goes back to like the simplicity.
Yeah, it's
And not it.
simplicity in terms of
Yeah.
mechanics, but it's so handcrafted that you can
Uh
look at a
huh.
map and go, that road leads somewhere, or there's something
Yep.
interesting up in those mountains, and I naturally want to branch out and check it.
And
Um,
there's like not really any icons except for the odd campfire that you find in like a major city. So it's not like that icon overload from like a Ubisoft game,
yeah,
which they've gotten so much shit for. I won't go into that again. But like even like the world map, like I like sometimes when it's like no guidance, it can feel overwhelming. Look at this huge map. But like generally I find there's all these little paths. If you look close enough on the world map, you could see even the tiniest little paths. And usually that's where the stuff is, but you have to make the effort to decide to travel that path. So if you're like, I want to like kind of go exploring, it kind of gives you a little bit of a starting point where you're like, oh, this path looks like it might go somewhere. I wonder what's at the end of that.
yeah,
Which is just fucking fantastic game design.
yeah. Well, because it's like you can tell again how they've managed to integrate the like world building with the world like gameplay design, because you have the main roads, effectively the highways that connect every major location, but then off of those main roads you have all the little smaller side roads that go off and maybe alternate paths or may go off to nowhere. So like your first
Mm-hmm.
time through an area, you're going to follow the main highway because you know it's going to take you to the next place. Once you've basically gone back and forth a couple times, then you're checking out more of these little, well, if I'm going this way, I haven't checked down that little path. And then eventually you've checked the paths, right? But
Yep.
then you're going, okay, well, I've checked all these little paths. What if I just struck off entirely in that direction where there are no paths? So you kind of
Mm-hmm.
end up in this like 3-phase exploration just because they went, here's big road, here's some small roads, here's no road.
Yep.
And
Mm-hmm.
they don't tell you this. It's just kind of the way that your brain, most people's brain, I think, from seeing and talking to other people, makes them want to explore the map. It's very smart design. While being like, they've managed to make it where having the tiniest guidance at all actually really smartly guides player exploration in a way that feels like completely unguided, and I love that.
Yep.
Yeah, this game, it just rips. It's fun to play. Like I think if people want like a big RPG, like I do think that people should come into this as blind as possible,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like this is not a Dark
And like
Souls, where you're going to want to look up a
embrace,
guide.
I
Like
think embrace failure, right? Like
yes.
embrace the fact you might miss stuff, embrace the stuff that the fact you're gonna fuck up a side quest. Because that's kind of the fun of it, is like seeing how things will play out and playing with the systems in the
Yeah.
game.
Cuz anything that's not a you died is
Yep.
is like something to continue off of. Treat it like improv. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and that failure. Because there's so much in the game that the idea of trying to 100% Dragon's Dogma, well, you can't because of the fact that so many quests have multiple outcomes.
Yep.
So you're already locked into not seeing the whole game. So just do it. I didn't even get to we were talking about this before we went on. I didn't even get to the Elf City until the post game, which is wild to me. I almost missed the Sphinx entirely, which would have been a crime.
Yep.
So
I haven't done it yet, but I just discovered that. But yeah, like I'm halfway through my second playthrough, and yeah, I think because like the quest I'm doing that brought me there wasn't available unless I was an archer, and it's like, holy fuck, like there's this whole other like area, and it's actually a really cool location. It's like a good chunk of the map.
yeah.
There's a lot of stuff up there, and like just like one thing I want to shout out before I forget, is like the details in the game. Like I don't want to say I hate the Breath of the Wild comparisons, but I think like I might have mentioned this before. I think a lot of this game's like a lot of what I like about old Bethesda games. I'm not trying to be spicy. I respect From Software games, but like for me, they're more frustrating than fun. So this to me is also like, what if a lot of the good stuff from games, but like without the bullshit that drives me crazy, like the immense difficulty, the punishing, like, hey, you can't just fucking walk off a cliff. Like it will usually try to stop you.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. But also like a lot of the little details are really cool. Like I won't spoil it, but there's a place in the game where you can make forgeries of certain items.
Yes.
And I'm only discovering on my second playthrough how fucking creative you can get.
How
with
much
that.
BS you can go through with it.
You can get like pretty much any item for a quest, and like before you turn in the quest, you could just run and make a forgery and turn it back, and then like that. And so I made a forgery of a jail key, for example.
And a lot of them, you get a different outcome because you gave the forgery.
Yep.
Like, it's so so interesting.
And I just made a couple little notes of like stuff I really love. Like there's one cave where having your lantern on attracts ghosts. That will constantly attack you, so you can turn off your lantern, but you can't fucking see shit. But I found that if you enchant a weapon with fire or use a fire enchanted weapon, it will light the cavern, but won't attract the ghosts. And I have to believe that's intentional.
That's
and it's
so
just
cool.
It's really, really clever. Yeah. Oh, and another one, there's a city in the game where you need a residence permit to not be attacked. And that wasn't an issue when I got there. And then at some point, all the guards in the city started attacking me. And I realized it's because you actually need the fucking permit on your person.
Yeah.
Because they're constantly inspecting you.
You need your papers, unfortunately, in this kingdom. Yes.
Yeah. You're being profiled constantly.
Yeah.
And I put it in my chest, and yeah, it does not lay that out to you. And I was very frustrated. I thought the game was bugged. And I don't know, like maybe it's frustrating, but I respect the hell out of it. It's very
the
clever.
fact that you can kill NPCs. Right.
Yeah.
And
but you can bring them back if you fuck up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah, if they stay, they go to the morgue and they give you some time to go to the morgue and find the body and use a revival item on them.
Yeah.
You know, which are rare enough and expensive enough that it's like not an easy thing to do. Like you feel a bit of pain having to part with one, but they're not so expensive and rare that you go, well, fuck, like I don't like it. You feel like you have to make a value judgment if an NPC dies and you want to revive them or not.
Yeah.
And again, like all these little concepts, none of it is that difficult on a mechanic by mechanic or concept by concept basis. It's all of the weird little ideas that combine together to make this just super living real world that gives such like an impact. I mean, it's the best.
Like you just called out the wake stones that can raise the dead. There's even been quests I did where like I got a violent outcome which I wasn't really wanting, and I killed the person, and then you get the chance to revive them immediately with the wake stone and still resolve the quest with them alive. Like,
yeah,
it's so cool. Like you said, the way it all ties together.
Yeah, this game, like I will say, for people who played the original Dragon's Dogma and bounced off of it, because like Justin on the podcast who told me, like he, and I know other people who were like this, picked it up. The original game's kind of slow to get into. It takes a bit before you have any idea of where the story's going. It takes a bit to really feel any sense of power in combat. And it can be kind of overwhelming without providing a lot of reward. And I think Dragon's Dogma 2 is way better at getting you into moving very fast by comparison.
I remember that distinctly from the first game, just like putting in 20 hours, be like, I don't know what's happening in the story. And this one, like an hour in, I'm like, hey, 2 Arisens, 2 Furious. Like there's 2 of us, one of us, like one of us is the real deal.
Is moving. You've got a main city that you're based out of. You feel like you can make a difference in combat. Like you're moving pretty quick an hour in. So, but like, so I think if somebody played the original Dragon's Dogma, and their issue was that it was too slow to get into. I think Dragon's Dogma 2 resolves a lot of your problems and gives you more meat to contend with in terms of the kinds of content, the variety of monsters, the etc. I think if you're a narrative first sicko, we're not going to talk too much about the story here, but my opinion is that the story starts much stronger and more direct and maybe ends in a stumble rather than the soaring heights of the original.
Yeah, it feels just like there's a piece missing.
Yeah.
To me,
The original game starts off feeling like there's basically no story, and by the end, it's the sickest shit imaginable.
And especially I heard with Dark Arisen.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
With the side story in that. This game, I think the story is more direct, but especially if you go through the true ending and go into the post game, the true final ending feels very abrupt. It feels very out of left field. You feel like it maybe was rushed to get out for the quarter, right? Which given some of the performance issues with the game, which are getting cleaned up in patches, it's already better than it was at launch. Maybe this game did, even with all its development time, it's a pretty small team. They might have had to push this thing out. I will be deeply curious to see what an expansion to this looks like, because I guarantee we get a Dark Arisen type expansion to the game.
It sold 2.5 million copies, I think, in the first week, which is pretty good.
I can't see it not getting, and I'd be so curious because maybe what this game needs is that expansion, right? To fully pull it up into 10. I think this is going to be a Game of the Year candidate for a lot of people, and a lot of other people are going to bounce off of it real hard. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's going to be divisive.
Which is I think it's the nature of what you said, the big swings, and there's some misses, and it's just going to depend how hard those swings hit for each person.
Yeah.
Right.
But I also think that if what you want if you see games as art and not content, right?
Yeah.
If you see these as the works of artists and not an endless feed of slop to be fed so that you can tune out the outside world.
Don't red letter media.
I think that Dragon's Dogma 2, games like this, are it's wonderful that a big publisher gave, a decent amount of money and a good amount of time to a development team to make this very weird, divisive, unsafe game. It is very not focus tested. It is clearly going to be something that turns away a lot of players, not because of its difficulty. People love that, you brought up From Software. People love when Dark Souls bounces somebody off because you can't beat a boss, right? I think a lot of those same people are going to get really frustrated that they just don't get Dragon's Dogma 2, even if it's perfectly approachable. But if you want art, then sometimes you're going to get shown a game that's maybe not for you. And I really hope Dragon's Dogma 2 is a learning experience for a lot of people, that the industry is better when games are allowed to be weird and unsafe, even if they're not for you. I don't know if you have final thoughts on the game, spoiler free, before we get into a little bit of gushing over weird stuff.
I guess maybe, I think a couple points, just housekeeping, I guess.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about the microtransactions. I'm not on Twitter. I haven't seen much talk about in the Discord, but I understand it's a thing. I've seen the reviews on Steam. I really I don't know. If it's a deal for you, I'm not trying to be dismissive.
No.
But to me, having played the game, having seen the intent behind its design, I do not feel it does not even mention, I fucking wouldn't even know there's microtransactions if no one told me. There's nothing in the game presenting them to you.
I bristle at calling them microtransactions, if I can be completely honest. So I'm super against predatory monetization in games. With Dragon's Dogma 2,
and I'm actually for save me 20 hours of grinding if I can pay $5 for something, as long as it doesn't compromise the game design. So I just want to say I'm actually
some of it
generally,
some of this stuff Capcom falls into territory. Capcom loves to make a bunch, here's $20 worth of little BS that most people would never even want to buy, and early unlocks for things, or extra in-game resources or whatever, and that stuff kind of makes me roll my eyes.
Mhm.
But so famously, I do want to make this very clear because I think a lot of people may have heard like vague drama about microtransactions. Unfortunately, this has been aided and pushed by some bad actors who I normally would have respected back in the day, which has made this more frustrating. But there is this idea that has been spread that like Dragon's Dogma 2 does not have fast travel in order to sell you fast travel. And that is blatantly not true. First off, because the first game was designed this way, right? And like there is fast travel in the game. You just have to use a limited use item to do it. So you have to decide if it's worth a fairy stone for the travel versus the
Mhm.
walk.
It's the same thing as the wake stones. Like they're in the game,
Yeah.
but like it's designed to make you think before you use
Yeah.
them.
So, but also, none of the DLC for the game is fairy stones. You cannot buy the fast travel item. You cannot buy.
Yep.
You can buy an extra port crystal, one of the things that lets you place like a custom fast travel point, of which there are several in the game. But you can only buy
They're useless without the fairy stones.
right. But you can only buy one. Right, you can buy
Yeah.
rift crystals, but that's just for summoning higher level pawns than you can normally access. Because basically, the way that the pawn summoning works is you can only summon close to your level unless you want to spend that rift crystals resource to get higher and higher level, which like you can get quite a bit of in the game. But there's a limited amount of rift crystals you can buy.
Mhm.
Like once you buy the 7 or 8 packs that are available, you're done. So like there's not a way for a whale to get addicted to buying rift crystals in this game. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like if people want to roll their eyes at Capcom's DLC practices where they sell like extra lives and shit like in limited amounts in the store, sure, I roll my eyes at that and I think that's stupid, but I don't buy it.
Yeah.
But calling it predatory, calling it microtransactions when it is by definition limited, unlike this cannot be compared to the kind of stuff that
Mhm.
happens in the free to play world and in the mobile games market. It's
Yeah.
not even close.
And you can't access them from the game unless I'm wrong. Like there's no like
I don't know. I didn't even look for it because I don't think about it.
well, it's not in the menus. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
So it's been disappointing to see like
yeah.
big figures talk about all these predatory practices, and then you look into it, and the main thing going on, the idea that they were carving out fast travel to sell it to you, is not even true. It's not even possible to buy fairy stones.
Yeah.
It really infuriated me how easily that disinformation was able to spread.
I really think in time, just even 6 months, a year, the quality of the game and the word of mouth will shine through.
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of
and
clearly has
people
already,
will-
like you pointed out. It's done pretty well for itself. So
the only other thing I want to touch on again, because this one I think is legitimate, right? Is the performance. I just openly I have a really good PC. I just upgraded it last year. I've got a good CPU, which is the main limiter for this one. So I can tell like the frame times are off. Like even when it's like 70 FPS, it doesn't really feel good. There's a couple weird, like everyone talked about the main cities. There's like some weird caves where I swear it dropped to like 10,
Yeah.
but like generally it ran really well for me. So I'm just like, I can understand that someone might have a different impression if they're playing on PS5 and it's like at 20 a lot. Cause like, depends on the person, right? Like that can impact your performance. But for me, I just wanted to acknowledge that it wasn't an issue, but that I recognize that some versions of the game, and then depending on your PC hardware, it could be detrimental. I think the game deserves better, and I do hope that they manage to find a way to fix that. The one that did bug me is like, again, no game is bug free. That was the one. There's like a couple bugs in the game that were pretty frustrating. One of them is like there's a mission where you have to stop an assassin and you can kind of like soft lock it. I guess if you sleep at a residence that you own instead of an inn, it doesn't set the clock properly. And another one where you like bribe a guard and he says to come back in a few days, and I waited like a month of in-game time after 2 hours, and so I mean that's normal stuff. They weren't main quest things, but again, I hope all this stuff gets fixed up with patches.
Yeah. Yeah, because like I've got, again, on PC here, right? And I've got a a Ryzen 5800X and
A good CPU.
an RTX 3070.
Mhm.
So like it's a pretty good rig. It's definitely not top end, but it's pretty good. And I was able to run the game 1440p, mostly high settings, get pretty good frame rates, but like it chugged sometimes in the cities, like you pointed out, and the frame times were
Mhm.
kind of rough. It's stuttery and uneven at times. And yeah, I've like that. It's the performance is not where it needs to be, and I think if you're sensitive to this stuff, and you're like a console only player, like just know that this game's gonna chug a bit. At least in the state it's in as of now. A couple weeks after launch.
Yeah.
And if you're playing on PC, just like understand you're gonna need kind of a pretty tough PC, and it's very CPU bound. And hopefully future patches clean that up. But you're right, that's gonna be a problem for some folks at this point. So, you know, we want to move into the spoiler gushing territory.
Let's do it.
All right. So from this point on, for the remaining few minutes of the review podcast, we are going to talk about weird solutions to side quests. We're going to talk about weird things that happen to us that might peel back the curtain a little bit on some of the mystery of the game, but we're going to try to keep it mostly intact. Can I start with some Sphinx stuff?
Yeah, I haven't done the Sphinx, but like I'm not worried about spoilers or anything
Yeah.
like that. Like I actually read up a bit on it. I'm like, I don't even know if I'm up for all that
I
stuff.
wanna-
The first
yeah.
one I saw was like having to remember where the
Yes,
first fucking
that's-
seeker
there
token
are
got. I was like,
two-
oh my god.
I did the whole Sphinx, all 10 riddles, right? Which
Yeah.
really they're more like challenges than riddles. But there are two in particular that struck me as the most like mean-spirited quest design, but in a way that I respect. One of them is what you
Yeah.
pointed out, which is there's the Seeker's tokens, which are a rare collectible in the game, and as you turn them in, you can get like increasingly rare items. And the Sphinx will challenge you to find where you have to go back to wherever it is you found your first Seeker's token. And
It's so clever.
here's the thing, right? Because I actually, once I got to this quest, like I had to read what people were writing about this quest because I was like, I know people have opinions. And I wish I remember who it was and where, but there's a great article I read talking about the idea that this is a quest that if you know it exists, you're gonna think to remember where you got your first Seeker's token, and it won't be a problem at all. If you don't know
Yeah.
the quest exists, it is simple, but one of the hardest things you could be asked. And I'm so lucky that my first Seeker's token was in a very memorable little spot right outside of Harv Village. So I remember being like,
Yeah, I feel like it was a while before I found my first one.
yeah. But it was like, so because of that, I had the memory in my mind of it, and I was very lucky because if it had been more out in the boonies, I'd be boned. The other one is, so the Sphinx will move. I want you as somebody who's beaten the game to understand this. The Sphinx will move after you do 5 riddles to a new location very close to the border checkpoint town. Okay?
Okay.
You meet the Sphinx there, and one of the challenges is the Sphinx will give you a gigantic vase that you have to carry in both hands and say, I need you to deliver this to a dude in Batal.
Oh my god. I know what's between that town and
Yes.
Batal.
So you have to carry this gigantic, very fragile urn, which will break if you sneeze on it, and you have to carry it all the way to Back Batal.
Can you use like the gondola system? Can you put it on the gondola and kind of
Sure,
pull it?
but you better hope none of those harpies attack you while you're doing it.
Yeah.
You can put it on an ox cart, but like the ox cart's gonna get
Oh, no,
attacked. Oh, and you can't fast travel.
Name
with
an ox cart that didn't get attacked.
Yeah, you also cannot fast travel with the ox cart. If you do that, it leaves the urn behind. So you have to
God.
real time transport this fragile urn from near the checkpoint border town to Back Batal, and it's mean spirited, but it's so funny. I couldn't help but laugh when this
I love that they were like, okay, we need an escort mission.
you could
How could we make this even more insane?
I could feel some middle-aged developer cackling as he thought, hey, we can make him do
Yeah.
this. Oh, yeah. Magical.
I think just one of the ones I have to mention. I guess I can't. Can I talk about the outcome of one?
Sure.
Did you do the
Which
one?
quest is it?
It's a relatively minor side quest. It's for Isaac and Batal, the guy who's trying to collect 2 grimoires or 2 books.
Oh, I didn't even do this one. I didn't even catch.
He's one of the
one.
merchants. He's beside the armor.
I did find one of the books, I'm sure.
Okay.
But I didn't ever find the quest related to it. So continue.
Yeah, I only got one outcome, which I guess was the bad outcome, but he's basically looking for 2 books. The first one, I guess, I think they're enchanted and it costs him his eye, and he asks you to get the second one, and his wife's like, "Oh my god, please don't help him." But so eventually I got the book and I went back and tried to talk to her to turn it in, but there wasn't really an option to. So I'm like, all right, I give it to him, and he goes into a room with his wife and daughter and reads the book, and they just fucking melt into a pile of ash. But he goes into complete denial.
He gets Full Metal Alchemisted.
Yeah, and he goes into complete denial. I was like, hey, where'd they go?
Oh.
Why is all this ash here? Huh, guess we'll never know. Oh well. And it's comical, but deeply dark.
That is almost exactly a perfect example of what if you had gotten a forged copy of the book instead.
And I think that's probably what I could have done.
Yeah.
But I don't even, I mentioned I took it back. I was in Batal for 15 hours before I realized I missed the checkpoint town because I came in the southeast direction through kind of near the volcanic island there. And I was using I bought the residence right away. So I didn't need, you're supposed to initially when you go in there, I think you probably have the Beastren mask and the Beastren residence permit. But yeah, I just bypassed all that stuff and fuck yeah. So I didn't know about the forgery place until almost the end of the game.
Which it's funny that you bring up the Beastren mask, that you need that and the documents to get through the checkpoint. But you could make a Beastren Arisen. You don't have to be a human. So
oh, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, you could probably just go through the border. They'd probably just let you through the wall because you're a cat dude. God, there's so much weird shit. And there's so many great little secrets. I only ever found one Medusa, other than the one you fight briefly in the very beginning of the game.
Yeah, I see all the trophies for them. I haven't found one.
Yeah.
Still.
God, what a wild fight, because the Medusa fight is so crazy because the one I fought was in this big, gigantic, open, cave area. Or it was crumbling ruins, and you had these massive pillars. So its gaze is this gigantic pink cone of vision. And you would have to hide behind the pillars to stay and kind of let the petrification wear off as you and your 4 pawns take turns catching its aggro. And it's so big, and its snake body winds and wraps through the arena. Just a truly impressive boss. The Talos, the whole Talos sequence is so fucking sick. When
I love that, and this is why I said, one of the things I love about the game, which not Breath of the Wild didn't invent it, but it reminds you of that is there's so many times in this game where I'm I wonder if this, and it fucking works.
Yes.
And when the Talos showed up, that's the big statue, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm running, and that's just when you come into that valley out of Batal. And I just kind of see this little cliff and ledge over there. I'm the timing looked right. I'm I wonder if I could make that jump off that cliff, onto him before he even gets to land. And just caught his arm. Yeah, just fucking what a sequence that was.
The fact that, the Talos in particular is such a powerful sequence because it is this, again, Shadow of the Colossus is the last time I felt like a boss fight had that kind of scale, because this isn't just a Final Fantasy 16 style, here's a big giant thing and you're going to fight it in a scripted way and then do QTEs and then no, this is a big thing where you can be miles away from the thing in real time and turn the map towards it and see it walking So it's like the fact that you understand that it shares the same physical
Mhm.
space as you despite your distance.
But it's so well designed that it sometimes feels like it could be scripted. Like,
Like I think its
I've only done
path
a
is, and
few.
it's obviously they
Yeah,
set up some good like encounter moments on the
yeah,
way.
but not even just that one. Like, I just mean like the big enemies in
Oh
general in the
yeah.
game. Like, I'm thinking of the Drakes. I've only fought a few of them, like non-story related. But like, I just did the one in Ancient Battleground. I don't know if you
Yeah,
fought
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that one or been up there yet. But it's like the way they have like sorry, I don't know what the term would be for them. Like the giant fucking mounted
The
bows.
ballista, yeah.
Um, the really big ballista, the big one.
Yeah.
There's a couple of them up on that castle. And it's just and like I've seen a few of them around like different drakes in the game, but like the way the valley's designed, and there's like so many different approaches to it. So like I tried to fight the drake on the ground, and I just like I got it to like 2 bars, but I was just getting wrecked. I was fighting it for like a good half hour, and the next time I just went up to the castle and kind of went to both ballistas and just pointed them at their like down at the ground. Spent a minute drawing back the thing all the way, and I fucking took out half its health in one go. And then kind of went down to finish it off. But like, it's just so exhilarating. And then like same thing, like the griffins, like the way it could just get up and fly away. There's one at the near the end of the game, which might be like main story related. I think probably one of the final ones. You know what I'm talking about, but it can kind of like carry you up, and you can jump off its back like onto this ledge that has more of
You're
those
talking about
ballistas.
the pseudo dragon enemy?
No, I think the real final boss before like if you choose to fight it, I guess, versus the other
Oh,
option.
I see. I see what you
Um,
mean. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, yeah,
I mean the
but
actual
yeah, and the
dragon.
pseudo one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pseudo one too, like with the little clusters. Some of them have those
Yeah.
little weak points and stuff. But yeah, it's just the fights in this game are, and they feel intuitive rather than frustrating, which is like a big thing for me.
Yeah. And then
Which I could just tell is good game
yeah,
design.
and then the whole way, so like it's kind of frustrating that the true ending and post game are locked behind a like it's very simple, but I don't think most people would ever stumble upon it naturally. It's very like somebody needed to put this on the internet for people to figure out how to do it. Um
I feel like there's enough of a clue. Like it kind of starts glowing as you get closer. It's almost like a homing
yeah,
beacon as you get closer to
I
it.
just never would have
But
thought to go into my inventory and use that item.
yeah, I looked it up. I didn't look up. I don't usually look up anything for games. This was the only thing I looked up because I was like, okay. At the time, I was like, I don't play through games twice, so like I'm only gonna get one shot at this. So I looked it up beforehand. But yeah, I agree. It's like, who would think to do
Yeah.
that?
But the post game, because normally you're good or bad ending when you fight the dragon, like, and that shouldn't be a
Mhm.
surprise that the dragon is the thing you're meant to fight.
Yeah.
But very much like the original game, fighting the dragon in the original game, fighting the dragon and beating it is kind of like brings you into like the final arc of the story, and it's a little bit more directly integrated in the story. In this game it is like a very separated post game sort of sequence where the map goes through a much more drastic change than what happens in the original. um and you kind of have to, you have like a time limit sort of, and you have to complete a series of objectives and help out the remaining like population in this like apocalyptic altered map before you hit the end. Um and it's incredibly interesting and incredibly engaging, and um I don't think it's as hard and as intimidating as like it makes it out like you are going to struggle, and I don't think it's necessarily that hard, but it's very interesting. I don't want to say too much.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
fair. I that's good to know because I think if I do get through the second playthrough before like kind of just taking a break, I do think I might try it. I think the main turnoff for me in games is like timers when I feel
It's
like
so it's
I'm on the
based on
clock. But
how many times you sleep, not an actual timer.
okay,
And it's like 10 or 12 rests from what I remember reading. So you have a pretty good amount of time.
well that's good.
It's
Is it like are we talking like 5 to 10 hours? Like how big a chunk of the game is this?
5 to 10 is probably about right, depending on how much you put into it.
Okay,
Because
yeah,
you can also
okay,
grind. Like you are definitely grinding out, not grinding, but like completing things for wyvern crystals, because
Yeah.
you suddenly get access to like the toppest tier weapons and armor in that post game, and you need a lot of wyvern crystals to get kitted out for.
Yeah.
But then like the thing is, it feels like you're kitting out for like a super difficult final boss, and then there's not one. It is like a cutscene style final boss sequence instead of an actual skill check, which is what I would have expected from like the end of the post game. But
Right.
I mean, again,
Yeah.
I will be really curious to see what this all looks like if and when an expansion comes around.
Mhm.
So you would enjoy the post game stuff, I think.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of like, well, what you're describing also reminds me of like World of Darkness from like Final Fantasy 15 or something like.
Yeah, kind of. It's not a bad comparison, sure.
Like aesthetically. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
yeah.
It's also just like because you're now kind of free roaming a much bigger version of the map. Like I don't want to explain how it changes.
Okay.
But like the map opens up and there's a lot more of it suddenly that you can in the same geographical space.
Yeah.
But you're just like you're kind of now just like running around trying to boss rush as many big enemies as possible because you need their materials so that you can upgrade equipment
I
as
actually
far
love
as
that.
possible and get the wyvern crystals so you can do like the secret 4th level of upgrades. But then again, the fact that there's not like a thing at the end to do that for, that there's not like a super boss, does feel like a missed opportunity. Because it felt like I was grinding for like an
Yeah.
Ultima weapon. You know what I mean? And there's not. And that's
And well, and I know because I did it like even on New Game Plus. Actually, one of the things I like about New Game Plus, which some people might not, is like enemies don't scale. Because like that's one reason I never do New Game Plus. Is like I don't want things to be
I want
harder.
things to
I
be
just
easier. I
want
want
to
to steamroll this.
I did my time. I beat the game. I want to be a fucking god
Yeah.
now. And this game let me do that. But yeah, so the same thing. Like even if you get kitted out and you start a new game, now you're like really overpowered. Like what's it all for? So that's interesting. I wonder if they'll use that with the DLC
Yeah.
somehow.
I mean, it's also possible maybe we just haven't discovered. Because like I want to say it was a little bit before people found the Ur Dragon in the original Dragon's Dogma.
Yeah.
But and of course, Dark Arisen added the daemon as like your actual like optional super boss. So again, I feel like we could get content updates. We have no idea if we're gonna get free content updates, which is a thing Capcom seems to love doing. I'm sure there will be an expansion. We are really reviewing the most vanilla version of this game, and this is a very different world from when the original game launched. So, yeah. God, this game is special. So weird.
Game is good.
This is closer to a messy like 8.5 than a messy 7 for me. It absolutely.
But that's why we don't do numbers, though, right? Because like
I don't like numbers.
What we just talked about would never be conveyed
Yeah.
in an 8 or an 8.5.
Is this game like a little narratively messy and like designed in a way that won't necessarily speak to everyone? Sure, but it's one of the most fascinating, like artist-driven big games. You just don't see the AAA space get this bold and this weird. And like, if people could come to the defense of Death Stranding, and I'm not trying to say that in a way that makes it sound like there's anything wrong with Death Stranding. I just mean that like people broadly and gamers, capital G gamers broadly, came to Death Stranding and loved it for being like weird and off the beaten path. And if you maybe accept that Hideo Kojima is not the only person who's allowed to do that, like you know, people can recognize that like Dragon's Dogma 2 is something very special in how it's allowed to exist. So that's
and it's funny you bring that up. Like I don't think we're not on the same page with Death Stranding, but like that was one of my favorite games. Like
I respect it. It just didn't click with me.
Yeah, and that's fair. But like this was the first game probably since Death Stranding for me that was like that. Like I know it's a good game when I put it down and I'm not playing it and I'm thinking.
Yeah.
And it's just creeping in there. And it's and I was talking about it in our Game of the Year discussion last year. Like I played a lot of good games last year. I really liked Final Fantasy 16, but like it was just a game. Like it was great, but this game is like
There's a little
memorable
magic in this
in
one.
a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. You got any other final things to add in? Because I think I've pretty much said my piece.
Uh, Same here. I don't know what more I can say. Just like you said, if you want something different, what you might like, you might not like. If you're on the fence, wait for a sale. But like, if you listen to any of this and think at least a third of it sounds like, oh, that's cool, I really think you should give it a try. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, that's what I've got. Thank you once again to Capcom for providing us a review code for Dragon's Dogma 2. That's our first big like standalone review code from Capcom. Very grateful because also like again, it's a series now that's very close to my heart. So it's very fun to get to gush about like the ways this game is weird and special. But I think people should look into it. I think look up some gameplay footage, like really think about is this going to be for you? Because I think if it hits, it's going to hit. And if you're going to bounce off of it, you're going to know you're going to bounce off of it. But like, I think more people than not are going to dig it. So,
Mhm.
that is it. Just a reminder, you can catch SDGC live for our usual news show Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And as John always likes to say, kindness costs nothing. Take care of each other, and we will see you next time.